One kiss, one murder. Who is to blame? Welcome to Silent Case File. I am your host, Pendleton. Comment where you're watching from. I read everyone. Let's uncover the deadly secret together. It was in the early days of October in that particular year, when the mists of London clung a little longer to the windows of Baker Street, and when Holmes, restless from a dearth of intellectually stimulating cases, had grown irritable to the point of reciting obscure passages from Boethius in their original Latin. I had returned from my morning rounds and found him at the window, violin in hand but unmoving, staring into the swirling fog beyond. "You are unusually silent today, Holmes," I remarked, setting my bag aside and warming my hands by the fire. "I was merely contemplating the nature of premature conclusions, Watson," he murmured without turning. "We live in an age where even minds trained in evidence are often seduced by the immediacy of the obvious." This cryptic remark might have passed without further inquiry. Holmes was often given to abstraction, had not Mrs. Hudson chosen that moment to enter with the Morning Post. Among the usual circulars and envelopes was a single cream-coloured letter sealed with the insignia of a red wax dove. Holmes, whose languor had seemed total a moment before, sprang up and snatched the envelope from the pile with sudden interest. "The dove seal," he said, examining the stamp with the air of a jeweller handling a rare opal. "A mark used by Lady Francesca Montclair, formerly of Belgravia, now Countess Rannoch. A woman of impeccable elegance and somewhat less impeccable marriages." He sliced open the envelope with his penknife and scanned the contents in silence. I saw his brow furrow, then lift. He handed me the letter without comment. "My dear Mr. Holmes, I am in the gravest possible danger, and I dare not turn to the police. By the time this letter reaches you, I may already be dead. The matter involves the most delicate of affairs, jealousy, betrayal, and something that was never meant to be witnessed. I beg of you to come to Rannoch House without delay. Tell no one, not even Dr. Watson. Trust no one. I shall explain everything upon your arrival. Yours in haste, F." I looked up. "Why on earth would she ask you not to tell me?" Holmes chuckled softly. "No doubt an attempt to protect your rather cherished innocence, Watson. But she underestimated me. The fact that she implores secrecy and attaches it to you specifically implies that the danger is not merely physical but social. Reputation, perhaps even blackmail, lies at the heart of it." "But what does she mean? By the time this letter reaches you, I may already be dead." Holmes reached for his watch, checked it, and then retrieved the Times from a nearby chair. Flipping through to the third page, he pointed a long finger at a brief notice. "Countess Rannoch found dead at her residence in Mayfair. Circumstances under investigation." Dated this morning. A silence followed. "Well," I said, feeling the familiar chill that presaged our darker cases. She was right. Holmes's eyes glittered with something like excitement. "Indeed. The letter was penned yesterday and posted by hand. She intended it to reach me before whatever happened. We are once more invited to a crime already in motion. Quick, Watson, fetch your coat. We go to Rannoch House." "And what do you expect to find?" "A corpse, of course, but more than that. Motive, method, and most importantly, misdirection. It is not the kiss that lingers, Watson. It is the reason for it." The hansom cab rattled through the mist-veiled streets of Mayfair, the wheels splashing through puddles left by the previous night's rain. Holmes sat opposite me, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes closed but far from idle. I had seen him in this posture before, a pose of apparent repose that disguised a mind working furiously, assembling possibilities, rejecting improbabilities, and storing away the first glimmers of deduction. Rannoch House, when we arrived, loomed pale and silent behind wrought iron gates. The gas lamps on the facade flickered faintly against the grey morning, and two uniformed constables stood by the front steps, speaking in low tones to a tall man in a dark overcoat. As we approached, the man turned toward us. I recognized the weary, somewhat leathery face of Inspector Lestrade. "Holmes," he greeted, rubbing his chin. "I rather suspected I'd see you here. The yard was called in barely 2 hours ago." "Then I'm only slightly late," Holmes replied, scanning the house with quick eyes. "And the Countess?" "Dead. Drawing room. Maid found her this morning." "And the cause?" Lestrade sighed, glancing at the front door. "We're not prepared to say just yet, but there's no sign of forced entry. House staff claim nothing unusual was heard during the night. No broken windows, and no apparent injuries. The local physician believes it may have been poison." Holmes's nostrils flared slightly. "A tidy assumption, conveniently silent and yet utterly unhelpful. Come, Watson." We followed Lestrade through the grand foyer of Rannoch House. Rich Persian rugs lined the polished floors, and portraits of long-forgotten nobles stared down with cold eyes. It was a home of opulence, but one that did not feel lived in, its rooms too pristine, its air faintly perfumed with lavender and old grief. The drawing room, where the tragedy had unfolded, was a spacious chamber with velvet drapes drawn half-closed against the daylight. On a chaise longue near the fireplace lay the still form of Countess Rannoch, a pale silk robe about her shoulders, one hand trailing over the edge, as if she had merely fallen asleep mid-thought. Holmes stepped forward and observed her closely, his eyes sweeping from her perfectly manicured nails to the faint, bluish tinge at her lips. He did not touch her. Instead, he turned to the side table beside the chaise, where an empty crystal glass stood, its rim faintly smudged. "What was in the glass?" he asked. "Brandy, we believe," Lestrade said. "Her maid says she always took a small measure before bed." "And the bottle?" Lestrade gestured to a decanter on a silver tray. Holmes examined it, then poured a drop into the glass, sniffed it, and nodded. "Unlikely the poison was in the liquor," he murmured. "There's no sediment, no discoloration, and yet—" He turned abruptly and examined the Countess's lips once more, his brows knitting. Then he turned to me. "Watson, note the corner of the mouth. See that faint residue? Almost like rouge, but not quite. Not paint." I leaned in and examined the smear he indicated. It did not appear natural. Holmes took a small handkerchief from his coat and pressed it gently to the mark. When he withdrew it, a faint trace of deep carmine remained. "What do you suppose that is?" I asked. "A kiss," Holmes said softly. "A final one, I suspect." Lestrade blinked. "You're saying someone kissed her after she was dead?" "Possibly. Or perhaps, just before. The Countess may not have died alone, and the lips of her killer may yet linger in this room." Holmes moved swiftly now, his gaze scanning the room with renewed energy. He examined the doorframe, the fireplace poker, even the fresh arrangement of lilies on the sideboard. "I should like to speak to the maid who found her," he said at last. The young woman, Eliza by name, was brought into the room. She trembled slightly under Holmes's steady gaze. "You were the first to discover her this morning?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I brought her tea like always, just past 8. She wasn't in her bed, so I came down and found her here, like this." "Was she in the habit of sleeping in the drawing room?" "No, sir, but sometimes if she had guests. She hesitated. "Go on." Eliza swallowed. "Sometimes she'd come down late if she was expecting someone, but lately she hadn't had visitors. Not since Lord Rannoch." Holmes tilted his head. "Lord Rannoch? I had understood he was abroad." "He left 3 months ago, sir. They fought. He's in France now, I believe. And did she seem agitated yesterday? Nervous, anxious? She was quiet, but not frightened. She had me prepare the blue guest room, though. Said it was to be aired. No one stayed in it, though. Holmes nodded. And last night, did you hear anything unusual? No, sir. All was silent. Thank you, that will be all. When she had gone, Holmes turned to Lestrade. You'll want to examine the blue guest room. I suspect you may find traces of a visitor who departed before morning, possibly quite early. Lestrade gave a grunt of acknowledgement and stepped away to begin arrangements. Holmes, meanwhile, gestured for me to join him by the fireplace. There is more here than an accidental death, he said in a low voice. Lady Rannoch feared she would not live to explain herself. Her instincts were correct. We are dealing with someone close enough to earn a kiss, and yet lethal enough to make it fatal. You suspect poison on the lips? I suspect contact. Whether poison was administered in that manner or the kiss served another function, concealment, distraction, we cannot yet say, but consider this. Why stage such a thing at all? Why not let her be found in bed? Why make it appear she simply expired mid-repose? To suggest natural causes? Exactly. And yet the note she sent proves she anticipated foul play. Her last act was to reach for me. That demands our diligence. We were interrupted by the return of Lestrade, whose expression was less dismissive than usual. The blue room had a guest, right enough, he said. The bed was disturbed, and someone tried to smooth it after, poorly. Also a man's footprint on the balcony tile, wet with morning dew. Holmes smiled faintly. Then the game begins in earnest. We must identify the visitor who came to Rannoch House under the cloak of night and left behind only a kiss and a corpse. He glanced at the clock. Time is now our adversary, Watson. Let us visit the butler next. I believe he will know more than he realizes. And so we followed Holmes out of the drawing-room, the hush of the great house pressing in around us, as if every curtain and candlestick remembered a secret too dreadful to speak aloud. The butler, a tall, spare man by the name of Treadwell, received us in his pantry, where the faint scent of beeswax and old sherry lingered. His hair was thin and combed with military precision, and though his face remained impassive, I noted a faint twitch at the corner of his mouth as Holmes entered. He stood at attention, hands clasped behind his back, the very model of discreet domestic service. Holmes wasted no time. Treadwell, you have been with the household for some years, I presume? 18, sir. Then you are likely the most observant man in the house. I imagine Lady Rannoch relied on your discretion. May I ask, did she inform you of a visitor last night? Treadwell's lips parted slightly, but he did not answer at once. He blinked once, slowly, as if weighing a decision. She did not inform me directly, sir, he said at last. But I was instructed to leave the side entrance to the conservatory unlocked. Holmes's eyes sharpened. That a door would admit someone without alerting the rest of the household? Yes, sir. Did you see this visitor? Treadwell hesitated. No, sir, but I heard movement around midnight, a soft footfall, not the Countess's, heavier, a man's. Holmes moved a step closer. You are certain? Quite, sir. I have served long enough to know the difference. And this man, Holmes continued, he came and left through the conservatory door? I can only assume so. I locked the door again, just past 5 o'clock. It had been left ajar. You informed no one? I did not, sir. Her ladyship was particular about such arrangements. I thought it best to stay silent unless asked. Holmes regarded him for a moment longer. Did you see her ladyship after the visitor's presumed departure? No, sir. I assumed she had retired. It was not unusual for her to sit late. Did she receive correspondence yesterday? Treadwell's gaze flicked to me briefly before returning to Holmes. Yes, sir. A single note, hand-delivered. No return address. Holmes's voice dropped an octave. Do you still have it? I took the liberty of placing it in her desk, sir. The top drawer. Holmes turned to me. Watson, if you please. Together we returned to the drawing-room. The Countess's desk stood in the far corner, sleek mahogany, its brass fittings dulled with age. I opened the top drawer, and there, among a scattering of blank paper and sealing wax, lay a single sheet of pale vellum, folded once and sealed not with wax, but with a pressed emblem, 2 entwined leaves. Holmes took it delicately, broke the seal and unfolded the note. The writing was fluid, stylish, unmistakably male. F. You are mistaken if you believe what you saw changes anything. We must talk tonight. No one else need know. I will come through the conservatory as before. C. Holmes handed the note to me without comment. C. I said aloud. Who could that be? An excellent question, Holmes murmured. We now know that someone came here last night to speak with Lady Rannoch, not in anger, as one might expect, but under some shared understanding, yet now she lies dead. Could it be Lord Rannoch? I asked. He is in France, yes, but perhaps he returned secretly. Holmes shook his head. No. Lord Rannoch is a man of bluster and pride. He would not creep through gardens like a thief in the night. Besides, I know for a fact he boarded the morning steamer to Calais 3 days ago. I made inquiries following their much-publicized quarrel. He paced slowly, hands clasped behind his back. No, this visitor is someone more subtle. Someone whose presence here had to be hidden. And this note, Watson, read its tone again. What you saw changes nothing. She witnessed something. He stopped short. Come, let us speak again with the maid. Eliza, still pale, reappeared under Lestrade's supervision. Holmes gestured for her to sit, and she did so, her hands twisted in her lap. Eliza, Holmes began gently, you told me the Countess had no guests recently. But what about suitors, couriers, secret callers? Think carefully. There was one man, sir. He came twice in the past fortnight. I never saw his face clearly. Always wore a dark coat, turned-up collar, came in the evenings. Did the Countess meet him here? I believe so. She would wait in the conservatory some nights. Once she told me to make certain no one else entered that wing. Holmes nodded. Did he leave anything behind? A note? A glove? A scent, perhaps? She blinked. He smoked a particular cigarette. Not English. A bitter scent like cloves and something else. I emptied the ashtray once. It was filled with dark tobacco. Excellent, Eliza. You've been most helpful. As she left, Holmes turned sharply to Lestrade. Find the ashtray. Have the ash analyzed. I suspect it will yield a specific origin, perhaps Turkish or Indian. Lestrade raised an eyebrow, but moved off. Holmes returned to the window where the fog had begun to clear. So, I said, we have a mystery suitor, a secret meeting, and a kiss laced, perhaps, with poison. Possibly not poison in the traditional sense, Holmes said slowly. Consider, Watson, how the Countess was found. No visible trauma, no struggle, no sign of intrusion. Only a faint mark, the residue of rouge or a foreign substance. What if the kiss was not an act of intimacy, but the mechanism of murder itself? You mean? I mean, he said, that we may be looking for a killer who used the kiss as a delivery system. A chemical agent absorbed through the lips. A rare method, but not unheard of in certain circles, particularly among espionage and intelligence operatives. But why would such a person target the Countess? Holmes turned from the window, his expression unusually grave. Because, Watson, the Countess may have stumbled upon something forbidden. She saw something, What you saw changes nothing, the note said. Whatever she witnessed was grave enough to warrant her silence, permanent, if necessary. He drew from his pocket the handkerchief with the crimson trace. This substance, whatever it is, will tell us more, but I suspect we are no longer dealing merely with a lover's quarrel. I felt a chill settle across my shoulders. What are we dealing with, Holmes? He met my gaze with a cold clarity. A conspiracy. One involving secrets far larger than a dead countess, and a kiss, maybe only the beginning. Lestrade returned shortly after with a brass ashtray held carefully in a handkerchief. Holmes took it without a word and examined the residue within. The ashes were dark, with thin, twisted remains of paper, burnt edges curling like tiny scrolls. "Distinctive," Holmes murmured. "Note the density of the tobacco, not your typical English blend. Turkish, most likely, but adulterated. See here, Watson, small traces of yellow pollen intermixed with the ash. Not an accident." I bent forward. "Could that be laced intentionally?" "Quite possibly. It suggests preparation, perhaps. Ritual. Whoever our visitor was, he didn't simply smoke to calm his nerves. He smoked to mark his presence, or leave behind a message of sorts." Lestrade cleared his throat, unimpressed by the poetic turn. "You're saying the killer left a message in the ash?" "I am saying," Holmes replied coolly, "that nothing this person did was without deliberate intent. A particular tobacco, a particular room, a meeting without a witness, and finally, an intimate gesture resulting in death. This is not a crime of passion. It is artfully composed." He turned to me. "We must have this analyzed. Take it to Bartlett's on Fleet Street. His microscope and chemical reagents are reliable." I agreed at once and departed swiftly, leaving Holmes and Lestrade to continue the inquiry at Rannoch House. By the time I returned, some 2 hours later, armed with Bartlett's preliminary report, clove-infused Turkish tobacco laced with trace elements of datura and a derivative of aconitine. Holmes had installed himself in the Countess's study with a stack of old letters, newspapers, and what appeared to be a black-bound guest book. I handed him the chemist's report, which he read in silence. Then, with a brief nod, he returned to the guest book and tapped the page he had been studying. "Watson," he said, "you'll recall Eliza's mention of the mysterious guest twice in the last fortnight? Look here. Entries on the 6th and the 14th, Mr. C. Volakis." Rather more honest than I expected. "Volakis?" I said. "Not an English name." "Greek," Holmes said, "though it may be a pseudonym. I have seen the name before linked to diplomatic circles and, more interestingly, to a brief scandal involving intercepted letters and military secrets in Thessaloniki." "Espionage?" I asked. He nodded. "And now the Countess is dead after a clandestine visit from a man who smokes a poisoned blend of foreign tobacco and kisses like an assassin." Lestrade entered behind me at that moment, frowning. "We traced the wax seal from the note you found, 2 entwined leaves. It's the emblem of a private club in Soho, the Thistle Room. Foreign gentry, exiled nobility, and political whisperers gather there. It's a members-only establishment. Discreet." Holmes's face lit up with satisfaction. Then our Mr. Volakis may not be far." He stood, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. "Watson, coat and cane. Lestrade, have your men keep an eye on the house. I suspect it may draw further attention before nightfall. And if we are fortunate, Volakis will not yet have fled." The Thistle Room was tucked behind a narrow green door in a discreet crescent off Berwick Street. A liveried porter raised an eyebrow at our entrance, but, confronted by Holmes's card and Lestrade's badge, ushered us in with minimal resistance. The air inside was warm, fragrant with pipe smoke and foreign spices. Gentle strains of a violin drifted from a side parlour, and men in tailored evening coats spoke in low, urgent voices. Holmes approached the reception desk, where a man of uncertain origin, slick-haired and yellow-eyed, looked up from a ledger. "We are looking for Mr. Valakis," Holmes said. "I do not give out member names," the man replied in heavily accented English. Holmes leaned in slightly. "Then allow me to make your task easier. Mr. Valakis is currently involved in a matter of state. If you do not assist us, this establishment may find itself the subject of less discreet investigations. Think carefully." The man hesitated, then glanced at the ledger. "He was here last night, left just before 11, paid his bill and took a private carriage to South Audley Street." "That's 2 streets from Rannoch House," I said. "Does he maintain a residence in London?" Holmes asked. "Furnished flat, Ryder Street. I can give you the number." Minutes later, we were once more in a cab, wheels rattling over cobblestones as we made our way to Ryder Street. Holmes's fingers drummed lightly on his knee. "If he is still there," Holmes said, "we must act swiftly. A man who kills with a kiss is not one who lingers once the deed is done." The building was a well-kept residence of 3 stories, each flat discreetly anonymous. The landlady, a sharp-eyed widow with a mop and apron, informed us that Mr. Valakis had returned late the previous evening and not emerged since. "Then let us hope he is merely resting," Holmes said. We ascended the narrow stairs and knocked sharply on the door marked 3B. No response. Holmes knocked again, louder. When still no answer came, Lestrade motioned to one of his men, who forced the door with a practised shoulder. The flat was dim, curtains drawn. A fire burned low in the grate, and the air smelled faintly of smoke and something floral, perhaps cologne or scented oil. On a small table lay a travel bag, hastily packed, and beside it a familiar red wax dove seal, twin to that used by the Countess in her letter to Holmes. We moved cautiously through the flat. The bedroom was empty, the bed unmade, the wardrobe hung half open, suits missing from their hangers. In the study, however, we found him. C. Valakis lay sprawled across the desk, a pen in his hand, ink spilled across the page beneath him. His eyes were open, glassy, his mouth twisted in a grimace of surprise. Holmes bent over him, lifted a gloved hand and sniffed the fingers. "Aconitine," he said quietly. "Self-administered or forced? That remains to be seen." He turned to the paper beneath Valakis's hand. The last word was barely legible. "Forgive." "Too late for that, I fear," Holmes murmured. I looked at him. "Do you believe he killed her?" "I believe he was present, and I believe he carried secrets, secrets worth dying for. But whether he was the instrument of death, or merely the final player in a longer game, remains unclear." He looked up, eyes fierce. "One thing is certain, Watson. The Countess died for what she knew, and Valakis followed her to the grave before he could speak it aloud. We are running out of living witnesses." I felt a chill run through me. "Then what do we do?" Holmes turned toward the window, gazing out over the rooftops of a fog-silvered London. We find what she saw. Holmes stood still at the window, eyes fixed on the grey rooftops, his profile half lit by the dwindling daylight. I knew better than to disturb him when he entered this trance-like state. It was in such moments that his mind arranged the disparate facts, sifted truth from distraction, and, on occasion, predicted events yet to unfold. Lestrade, meanwhile, had begun methodically examining the study for signs of struggle, speaking in low tones to his constable. I busied myself by inspecting the desk more closely. Beneath the sheet on which Valakis had scrawled his final, incomplete word lay a half-finished letter, written in the same elegant hand. Holmes noticed me, lifting the page, and stepped forward. Together, we read the contents. My dearest F, you were right. I was a coward to think I could undo what has been done. The document should never have left Paris. They will come for it, if they have not already. Burn it. Do not trust even the embassies. There are too many hands in this pot, and not all of them wear gloves. If you are discovered, say nothing. Our kiss must remain unspoken. See, I turned to Holmes. A document? Smuggled from Paris? Is this what the Countess witnessed? Almost certainly, he said. The phrase never should have left Paris confirms it. I had a suspicion this was not merely a romantic tryst gone wrong. We are entangled in something far more delicate, political intelligence, perhaps state secrets. And the kiss must remain unspoken. A cipher, do you think? Holmes shook his head. No. A warning, Watson. Their meeting, whatever passed between them, was not meant to be disclosed. The method of death, the intimacy of the act, was chosen with care, both to avoid suspicion and to discourage examination. He returned to the desk, opening drawers with swift precision. In the bottom drawer, beneath a sheaf of foreign newspapers and an English-French dictionary, he uncovered a folded oilcloth bundle. Unwrapping it revealed a thin dossier tied in red twine. The top sheet bore the stamp of the French Ministry of War. Holmes whistled under his breath. There it is, the document Valakis smuggled out, likely the very one the Countess had seen or read. This is what killed her. He leafed through the contents quickly, but with focus. Communiqué, troop movements near Strasbourg, notes on joint maneuvers with the Russians, and, plans for troop rail deployments. I felt a shiver travel up my spine. Sensitive material indeed. Enough to ignite tensions. Between France and Britain, should it be mishandled, it explains everything. Valakis, likely acting as a courier, brought it to London. He trusted Francesca or believed she could help him. Instead, she read it and realized its implications. Too dangerous to keep, too dangerous to reveal. But someone else knew she had it, I said. Or at least suspected. Enough to ensure she never had the chance to act. Holmes paused. There is one thing that troubles me, Watson. What's that? The timing. The Countess sent her letter to me yesterday afternoon. Valakis died today, presumably by his own hand. If he feared capture, he could have fled last night. He was not restrained. He had opportunity. So why did he remain? Guilt, I ventured. Grief? Possibly. Or he was waiting for something or someone. Holmes paced the room, gaze flicking between the desk, the fireplace and the curtained window. Then he snapped his fingers and turned to Lestrade. Have one of your men check with the building porter. Ask if anyone visited Mr. Valakis after midnight. Lestrade nodded and stepped out. Holmes returned to the documents, selecting one thin page toward the back of the file. This, he said, is the most damning. A coded list of names, agents perhaps, or informants. One of them is marked with a small cross. It may be our next lead. Before I could reply, Lestrade's constable returned with news. Sir, the porter says a gentleman arrived around 1 o'clock this morning. Tall, brown overcoat, hat pulled low. Asked for Mr. Valakis by name, said he was expected. Porter let him in, but never saw him leave. Holmes nodded grimly. So Valakis had a visitor after the murder. That narrows our field. Watson, the Countess died likely before midnight. Valakis returned from the Thistle Room just before 11, which means this visitor arrived after her death but still found Valakis alive. Either he killed him quietly and staged the suicide, or he came to retrieve the documents and left disappointed. Lestrade scratched his chin. We didn't find a second glass or any new fingerprints. Then our guest was meticulous, or perhaps someone Valakis trusted enough to serve his own drink. He folded the dossier carefully and slipped it into his coat. This cannot remain here. It must be returned to the French authorities through the proper channels. But before we do that, we must finish what we've started. Outside, the fog had begun to return, cloaking the street in a damp hush. Holmes and I walked in silence for several minutes, each absorbed in our own thoughts. Finally, he spoke. Francesca Montclair was not naive. She knew the power of what she held, and that it endangered more than her own life. She wrote to me, not simply in desperation, but in hope that I would see what others would overlook. You think she intended to pass the dossier to you? Perhaps, but she never got the chance. The question now is, who feared she might? And more pressing still, who came for Velakis to tie up the last loose end? We returned to Baker Street just past 8. Holmes lit the fire and sat with his violin, not to play, but to cradle it absent-mindedly as he thought. I poured 2 glasses of brandy and waited. At last, he said, "The thistle room gave us a clue, that emblem. 2 entwined leaves. Did you notice anything familiar about it?" I confess I did not. It's also the private mark of a man we've encountered before. Baron Delacroix. The arms dealer? Indeed. Now more a facilitator of secrets than munitions. He operates quietly, but I have seen his hand in 3 separate intelligence affairs. He frequents the thistle room and counts both diplomats and criminals among his circle. You believe he is our midnight visitor? I believe, Holmes said slowly, that he orchestrated this entire affair. Velakis was a pawn, the Countess, an unintended liability. The Baron, he seeks the dossier. Then he doesn't know we have it. Holmes smiled faintly. Not yet. He stood, setting his glass aside. Tomorrow we visit the Baron. But we shall not go as ourselves. If he kills with a kiss, Watson, we shall answer with a mask. The following morning brought with it a bracing chill and a sky the colour of tarnished silver. Holmes was already dressed when I came down to breakfast, his lean frame wrapped in an unfamiliar charcoal suit with a satin cravat tied at a rakish angle. Gone was his usual precision. His eyes, however, gleamed with alertness. "You look like a man about to attend a dinner party," I remarked. "Indeed," Holmes said, fastening a pearl pin to his lapel. "But this one serves a rather different menu: secrets, deception, and, if I have my way, a confession." He picked up a leather portfolio and handed it to me. "The dossier remains here, in your safekeeping, locked in the strong box, should anything go awry." "You intend to confront Delacroix?" "Not confront, entice." He adjusted his gloves. "The Baron does not respond to threats, only opportunity. I shall approach him as one who knows the value of what he seeks, but has not yet decided what to do with it." "You'll go alone?" "I'll go as someone else." Holmes had, in the course of our adventures, assumed any number of convincing identities, from decrepit book collectors to drunken groomsmen. But this one, I sensed, was more intricate. He would not say the name he intended to adopt, only that it would be known to the Baron. I watched as he transformed with a subtle blend of posture, accent, and attitude, becoming in minutes someone I scarcely recognized. He left Baker Street just after 10. I, in the meantime, busied myself with organizing our case notes and reading through the dossier again, this time more methodically. The marked list, names followed by symbols, troubled me. One bore a dagger beside it, another a double line beneath. Some were English, others clearly French or Eastern European. Coded rankings, targets. It was beyond my training, though I made note of every name, suspecting Holmes would later draw meaning from their arrangement. It was nearly 1 o'clock when Mrs. Hudson brought in a sealed envelope with no postmark. The handwriting, in dark, slanted strokes, was unfamiliar. "To the one who holds the flame, you have taken what is not yours. Return the book, or the next fire shall be in your own house. There will be no second warning. D. The final letter was unmistakable. I immediately secured the dossier and took down the serial number on the envelope. Then I stepped to the fire and destroyed the note entirely. Holmes had been right. The Baron knew the only question was how quickly he would move. Holmes returned shortly after 2. He entered without ceremony, removing his coat and hat as though coming from a light stroll, though his expression was anything but casual. "He knows," I said, handing him the charred remains of the envelope's corner. Holmes nodded. He knew before I arrived, which means we have very little time. Did he admit it? Not directly, but he was far more interested in my presence than surprised by it. He posed as a gracious host, even offered me a glass of his finest Armagnac, but his questions were precise and his eyes too still. I presented myself as a courier for a foreign buyer, an arms broker seeking the package Delacroix had failed to retrieve from his agent. I made it clear that I had leverage. And his reaction? He smiled, Holmes said darkly. But it didn't reach his eyes. He asked where the package was. I replied I had a contact, one who knew the item's exact worth and who might be persuaded to hand it over for the right terms. You played bait. Exactly, and now we wait to see if the trap closes. He paused, then went to the mantelpiece and began writing a telegram. To Mycroft, he explained. There are diplomatic ripples here. This list, Watson, these names. If even one is confirmed to be an active agent or envoy, it could destabilize not only France, but our own network across the Channel. He sealed the message and handed it to me. Send it at once. We cannot afford an intercept. While I was away, Holmes secured the dossier beneath the floorboard safe, a compartment I had seen used only thrice in our years together. When I returned, he was by the window again, watching the street below through a pair of opera glasses. "Do you see them?" I asked. "I see everyone," he murmured. "But not the one I'm waiting for. Delacroix is too intelligent to act personally. He'll send someone else." "An assassin?" "Possibly, but more likely a buyer, someone whose hands are clean enough to negotiate, but stained enough to know what is at stake." The rest of the day passed in tense vigilance. Lestrade called at 5:30, having questioned the staff at the Thistle Room again. No one admitted knowledge of Volakis's final visitor, but a shadowy gentleman matching the description had recently joined under a false name. At dusk, as gas lamps flickered to life, a carriage pulled up outside Baker Street. Holmes straightened at once. "Here it begins." We waited. The knock came, 3 sharp taps, then silence. Holmes nodded to me and opened the door himself. The man who entered was not what I expected. He was young, finely dressed, with the kind of polite detachment common in diplomats. But his eyes, restless and too alert, belied the calm. "Mr. Holmes," he said with a faint accent, "I am to believe you are in possession of something my employer greatly desires." Holmes gestured to the chair. "And who is your employer?" The man smiled. "Let's not insult each other with lies, Mr. Holmes. You know who he is, and I know you know." Holmes inclined his head slightly. "Very well. What does he propose?" The man reached into his coat and drew out a flat velvet pouch. From within it he produced a single sapphire, deep blue and perfectly cut. "A token of good faith. In exchange, the document. We part ways peacefully." Holmes took the gem, examined it against the light, then set it aside. "I'm afraid I don't deal in gemstones." "Then name your price." Holmes's gaze was steely. "The price is truth. Who killed Countess Rannoch?" The man's face twitched just for a moment. "She was a complication." "And Volakis?" "A failure." Holmes nodded slowly. "Then tell your employer the price is this. the full network of names behind the file's creation. We meet again tomorrow, or not at all. The man stood, a flicker of unease breaking through the mask. He will not like ultimatums. Holmes offered a rare, cold smile. Neither do I. After the door shut, I exhaled slowly. Do you think he'll return? Holmes stared at the closed door, his voice low. He'll return, because the one thing more dangerous than a secret is a man who understands it. We kept the lamps low that evening, the windows curtained, and the front door bolted. Holmes moved with a quiet precision, setting small traps not for mice but for men. Slivers of paper wedged in the door jambs, the faintest scatter of flour across the threshold, and a hair threaded over the latch of the back window. He said little, and when he did, it was in clipped phrases, the kind he used when his mind was no longer among the present company, but far ahead, 2 or 3 moves into the darkness. I sat near the fire, rereading the dossier in sections, cross-referencing the names we had with known foreign dignitaries, journalists and suspected agents I had encountered in passing during my time in the army, medical service. The list was more than mere espionage, it was a ledger of leverage. Some of the names were English. One, chillingly, was a retired admiral now advising on coastal defences. Holmes finally spoke around 9:30. There's a pattern in the markings beside the names, Watson. I've deduced the meaning of the dagger, the double lines, the crosses. They are not symbols of status, but action. He placed 3 slips of paper before me on the desk. The dagger means neutralized, he said, assassinated or discredited. The double lines, recruited or compromised. And the cross, pending action. I drew in a breath. You think the Countess? She was the cross. Velakis, a double line. He defected, or tried to. He brought the dossier either as a bargaining chip or an act of conscience, and someone, somewhere, did not want that transaction to complete. A soft rap at the window froze us both. Holmes raised a finger and moved to the curtain. He pulled it back by an inch and peered out. It's Lestrade. I unlocked the side door and ushered the inspector inside. His face was pale, lips tight. You've had visitors, he said, without preamble. Rannoch House was broken into an hour ago. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Anything taken? A desk drawer forced, drawers ransacked. They were looking for the letter, possibly the guest book. Any witnesses? The butler claims he saw a shadow slip through the hedges, but no clear face. Slender, fast, perhaps a woman. Holmes nodded once, then turned back to the map spread across the desk. They're accelerating, he said. Too many loose ends. The visitor who came to me today was not sent to offer peace. He was sent to confirm possession and weigh our caution, but his calm was brittle. You think they'll try again? Lestrade asked. They already are, Holmes replied grimly. But the game has changed. We no longer hold the item, they believe we are the item. I forced the Baron's hand. He must now silence us or risk exposure. Lestrade let out a low breath. What do you need? Eyes at the club, Holmes said. Discreet ones, and I need a name from your files, a woman with intelligence contacts, someone who's operated in Paris and London, fluent in French, possibly Greek. Lestrade blinked. That's narrow. I've made it narrow. He considered for a moment. Irene Adler worked with the French resistance network, but she's gone, Holmes said with an odd note in his voice. She would not use poison. No, we need someone current, dangerous, and with ties to the Baron. Lestrade rubbed his temples. There is one woman, Sophia Corder, former translator at the Greek embassy, rumoured to have seduced a Baltic attaché and vanished with naval maps, disappeared 6 months ago. Where last seen? Soho, a boarding house near Dean Street. But it was cleared out days later. Holmes's eyes glittered. She fits. He turned to me. Watson, you recall the wax on the first note? The dove seal? An illusion, but in the light it shimmered faintly. There was lavender oil in it. That, combined with clove smoke and datura, these are tools of a woman who knows chemistry and courtship. And the maid's description of the midnight guest. Small, quick, concealed beneath a man's coat. It wasn't a man at all, it was Sophia. You believe she kissed the Countess? I believe she silenced her. Volakis never intended the Countess to die. He was already on edge when he met her. But someone followed him, discovered his confidant, and eliminated her before the truth could escape. Lestrade straightened. Do you want her arrested? No, Holmes said. Not yet. Let her believe we remain one step behind. She will return or she will strike again, but she must believe her mission is incomplete. He stepped to the fireplace and stirred the embers. Tomorrow we draw them in. The Baron, Sophia. All of them. We force them into the open. And how do we do that? I asked. Holmes turned, eyes fixed on mine. We give them what they want. He took the leather dossier from the strongbox and laid it on the table. Tomorrow evening, we shall deliver this to a neutral intermediary, publicly, somewhere visible, where they cannot strike without revealing themselves. And where will that be? Leighton Hall, he said without hesitation. The foreign art auction. Every diplomat and spy in London will be there, bidding on paintings no one cares about while whispering secrets behind fans and catalogues. And the exchange? Holmes smiled. Already arranged. I've written to Mycroft. He will attend as the buyer. I shall be the courier. Lestrade looked concerned. You're offering the dossier as bait? Only a decoy, Holmes replied. The real file will remain with Watson, locked and guarded, but the idea of the handover, so near, so tempting, will draw them like wolves to a carcass. He closed the dossier and extinguished the lamp beside it. Tomorrow, we watch them descend. And if we are fortunate, Watson, the final act will not begin with a kiss, but with the truth. Morning broke with a thin drizzle and a haze that clung to the city like a veil, muting the colours of London and lending everything the look of a blurred daguerreotype. Holmes was already at the table when I came down, a bowl of untouched porridge before him, and the Times folded neatly to the notices page. His hair was damp from the basin, and his gaze was distant, calculating, but not detached. Everything is set, he said without preamble. Mycroft has confirmed he'll be at Leighton Hall precisely at 6 this evening. The dossier, our dossier, will be handed off to him in the presence of 24 witnesses and in full view of 12 more who are paid not to be seen. And the real one? Still locked in the floor safe, Holmes replied. Its absence will not be noted. Mycroft has created a convincing facsimile, enough to tempt even the most cautious. He stood and walked to the fireplace, where the decoy dossier now sat wrapped in unmarked parchment, tied in plain twine. We must give them a chance to act, Watson. Their desperation is the only truth they cannot disguise. As the day progressed, preparations were carried out with military precision. Lestrade posted plainclothes constables throughout the auction house, while Mycroft's man from the Foreign Office ensured the guest list included all the right dignitaries and several of the wrong ones. Holmes made no effort to hide his identity, walking into Leighton Hall in the early evening with the dossier plainly under his arm. I followed closely, dressed in my service uniform to appear as an ordinary military attaché. My role, Holmes had said with a rare wink, was to look credible and boring. Leighton Hall itself was a splendid venue, an arched gallery of golden columns, its domed ceiling painted with cherubs who looked on with soft-eyed detachment at the games of men below. Rows of canvases lined the perimeter, each assigned a number, though few eyes lingered long on the art. It was the crowd itself, tight-lipped aristocrats, angular diplomats, and feathered women of alarming poise that created the real exhibition. Holmes moved slowly, deliberately. The dossier passed from his left hand to his right as he glanced at canvases, exchanged pleasantries, and allowed himself to be seen. It was not long before the eyes began to gather. I saw the Baron first, standing beside a minor Prussian envoy, his gaze unmistakably fixed on Holmes. He was dressed in dove grey, his walking cane topped with a polished obsidian sphere, and he smiled as though all the world amused him. Then came Sophia. She was nearly unrecognizable without the cloak of night, but Holmes had prepared me. Her auburn hair was pinned up in an austere chignon, and she wore a dark blue gown that spoke of restrained elegance. She did not approach us at once, only moved in our orbit, speaking with various men, pausing often to glance at Lot D73, a forgettable pastoral scene near the auctioneer's platform. "She's circling," Holmes murmured to me without turning. "And the Baron! Note how he speaks but does not smile. He's waiting for her to act." "At what moment will they strike?" "When the handover begins," Holmes said. "When the risk of losing the file outweighs the danger of exposure. They will test our guard first, see if there is interference. If they sense opportunity, they will move." At precisely 6, Mycroft entered with all the subtlety of a passing cloud. He was dressed in a subdued frock coat and grey gloves, escorted by 2 Foreign Office men who had the unmistakable bearing of men prepared to look bored while carrying revolvers. He walked directly to Holmes and extended his hand. "You have it?" he asked. Holmes handed him the dossier with a slight bow. "As promised." Mycroft tucked it beneath his arm and turned away. That should have been the end of it. But as Mycroft moved toward the side corridor to exit, Sophia broke from the crowd and intercepted him, speaking in rapid French, her eyes wide with feigned urgency. Holmes stepped forward, blocking the Baron's subtle movement toward the pair. The air in the room changed. Conversations faltered. The clink of a dropped glass rang out too loud. Sophia reached for Mycroft's arm, and in that instant Holmes was upon her. "Madam," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "I believe your credentials are false." She froze, the touch of her hand just brushing Mycroft's sleeve. "Step away," Holmes said, his voice low now. "There are no embassies left for you to flee to. You tried once with the Countess, and again with Volakis, but this time you've misjudged the play." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought she might bolt, but instead she smiled. "You're too late," she whispered. That was when I saw it. A flicker near the rear doors. One of the Baron's men, tall, gloved, with a pistol barely visible in the folds of his coat, moved with purpose toward Mycroft. I called out, but Holmes was already moving, hurling the silver-handled cane he'd brought as ornament. It struck the man square in the wrist, sending the gun skittering across the marble. Panic bloomed. Guests screamed. Lestrade's men swarmed. Within seconds, both Sophia and the would-be shooter were restrained. The Baron, seeing the tide had turned, made no attempt to intervene. He merely straightened his cufflinks and retreated into the crowd, his face unreadable. When order was restored, Holmes turned to Mycroft. "Are you unharmed?" Mycroft nodded curtly. "Your performance, brother, was alarmingly theatrical." "And yours?" Holmes replied, "was delightfully dull." Later, as the suspects were taken away under heavy guard and the crowd began to disperse, Holmes and I stood in the great gallery's shadowed colonnade. The dossier, the real one, remained secure, but the game had changed. "It wasn't about the file alone," Holmes said quietly. "It was about the names. They planned to use them, either to compromise alliances or to dismantle foreign trust. Francesca saw it, and they killed her. Volakis tried to correct it, and they silenced him. But tonight, Tonight we turned their weapon inward. I looked at him. Will Sophia speak? In time, loyalty born of fear is brittle, and the Baron, he will retreat, disappear, resurface elsewhere. But he'll remember tonight. As we stepped into the cold evening, Holmes glanced once more at the flickering gas lamps and said, almost to himself, "The kiss that killed her was not the act of a lover, Watson, but a signature, one meant to erase a witness. And now that signature has been read aloud." He paused. "And signatures, my dear Watson, are where the trail begins." We returned to Baker Street that night, not in triumph, but in exhaustion. The veneer of resolution that had settled over Leighton Hall did little to soothe Holmes, who remained quiet throughout the cab ride, his features still, but his hands restless. He stared out the window, eyes flicking across the mist-slicked streets as though searching for someone who had slipped from view. Once inside, Holmes lit the fire with deliberate slowness, then moved to the desk where the original dossier lay, sealed in its compartment beneath the floorboards. He checked it briefly, ensuring nothing had been disturbed. I watched him from the hearth, the events of the evening still fresh in my mind, the sharp flick of his cane, the glint of the pistol, Sophia's final smirk as she was led away. "You don't believe it's over," I said quietly. Holmes didn't answer immediately. He closed the compartment and straightened, then poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a glass and handed it to me before taking his own seat. "There are endings, Watson, and there are pauses," he said at last. "Tonight we've severed a limb, but the body survives. The Baron remains at large. Sophia is in custody, yes, but she's a pawn, not a planner. And there's something that doesn't quite align." I leaned forward. "You mean the attempted exchange? It failed." "Surely the Baron's reach has been damaged." "Possibly. But only a fool strikes without an escape plan, and Delacroix is no fool." Holmes stood again, pacing, his hands laced behind his back. The attempt on Mycroft's life was too crude, desperate, as if it were meant to distract us, or worse, meant to fail. "You believe they wanted to be caught?" "No," Holmes said, shaking his head, "but I believe they intended to lose something insignificant, a token sacrifice, and in return make us believe the threat is past." I frowned, considering. "But what would they gain from that?" He stopped abruptly. Time to recover the real objective." I stared at him. "You mean the document wasn't the target?" "No, the document was the bait we used," Holmes said. "But what if the bait they used was the same? What if their goal was never to reclaim the file, but to erase something else entirely?" He walked to the bookcase, pulled out a folder, and flipped it open to the guest list from Leighton Hall. "I kept a copy," he said, almost absently. "Look here. Note who was present. Diplomats, financiers, 2 or 3 military envoys, all accounted for, but who wasn't?" He tapped the list. "The French attaché Etienne Larocque, missing. He confirmed attendance and never arrived." "You think he was taken?" "Or eliminated," Holmes said darkly. "Velakis mentioned a document that should never have left Paris. But he never said who gave it to him. It wasn't his own theft. He was a courier. Someone else extracted the file. Someone trusted." I felt a chill return. "And Larocque?" Holmes nodded. "A prime suspect, but more than that. He may be the original leak, and now he's vanished. It fits. The Baron creates a distraction, we spring the trap, and in the confusion, the last witness disappears." He turned and looked directly at me. "Francesca saw more than we thought. Not merely the document, but who gave it to Velakis. That's what killed her." We were interrupted then by a knock at the door. Rapid, purposeful. Holmes opened it without hesitation. Lestrade entered, rain-damp and frowning, holding a telegram in one hand. "Thought you'd want to see this straight away," he said. Intercepted message. Our men monitoring outgoing wires from London ports picked it up an hour ago. He handed it over. Holmes scanned the lines in silence. His expression did not change, but a single exhalation escaped his nostrils. From Le Havre, Holmes said. Message addressed to one C. Dove, short, coded, but the meaning is unmistakable. He read aloud. Package lost, Dove secured, names cleansed. Proceed to Alexandria. Winter comes early. Holmes lowered the paper, slowly. Dove secured, that's Laroque. Names cleansed, they've eliminated other loose ends. And Alexandria, likely the next safe haven. So we've lost him, I said. For now, Holmes replied. But not entirely. He's not simply fleeing, he's being relocated. The Baron is not finished. He's retreating to regroup, which means the network lives. Lestrade scratched his head. What would you have us do? Holmes considered. We let Sophia believe she's broken us. We leak word that the file has been destroyed. No trial, no interrogation, merely silence. If they think we've turned the page, they'll become careless. He turned back to the fireplace, his silhouette cast long across the room. But Sophia will speak? Eventually? Perhaps not to us, but to someone. She's too intelligent not to calculate the cost of loyalty now. I sat back, suddenly wearied. What of Francesca? Holmes said nothing for a long time. Finally, he replied. She was brave. She did not try to profit from what she knew. She wrote to me because she believed in the weight of conscience, not the price of secrets. He stepped over to the mantel and removed the small photograph she had enclosed with her letter, an old one taken years before in a sunlit garden. In it, her face was turned slightly away, as though even then she had known something was coming. I failed her, he said quietly. Had I arrived half a day sooner? No, I said firmly. You chased down the men who silenced her. You made certain her death meant something. Holmes's jaw tightened. Not yet, Watson. It means nothing until the last hand behind it is revealed. He set the photograph down gently and turned toward the window, where the fog was lifting under the moonlight. We're close, but not finished. And as the fire burned low in the hearth and the house fell silent once more, I understood that Holmes was right. The kiss that triggered murder was not just an ending, but the opening breath of something larger, more tangled, and far from over. The following day dawned with brittle clarity. The rain washed clean from the windows and the sky, a pale blue above the chimneys of Baker Street. But the light did little to dispel the lingering weight that had settled over our rooms. Holmes was quiet, methodical, his breakfast untouched, his eyes scanning column after column of international telegram records, port departures, and obscure diplomatic schedules spread across the table like the pieces of an unfinished game. We spoke little that morning. I understood that his mind, though seemingly still, was already abroad, pursuing threads across oceans, guessing at the shape of things before they fully emerged. At 9:30, Lestrade returned, this time with a guarded expression that made Holmes look up before the door had fully opened. She's speaking, Lestrade said simply, handing over a single-page transcript. Holmes unfolded it, reading in silence. I stood beside him, and together we saw the first real fracture in the enemy's wall. Statement of Sophia Corder, delivered voluntarily under observation. I did not kill Francesca Montclair. I was instructed to silence her, but when I arrived at Rannoch House, she was already dying. Volakis had met with her earlier. He had no idea they were watching him. He had brought her the document to keep, not to use. He trusted her. That was his second mistake. The first was believing he could leave the network. The kiss was his, not mine. I arrived too late. My role was only to confirm her silence, and ensure the document had not changed hands. It was gone by the time I searched the room. Volakis fled. I followed. He refused to surrender what remained. I offered him an alternative. He chose death. I do not regret following orders, but I regret underestimating what you would make of it. Holmes folded the page slowly, then dropped it onto the coals in the fireplace. "She's telling the truth," he said, "at least in part." I frowned. "Then Volakis was the killer." "No, he may have delivered the poison, yes, but not by intent. Remember, Watson, the Countess's note, something never meant to be witnessed. What if he didn't come to kill but to say goodbye? A farewell sealed with a kiss, one contaminated by the very item he carried." I blinked. "You mean the poison was accidental?" "Not accidental, residual," Holmes said. "Datura, aconitine." The file was more than paper. It was laced, possibly to prevent unauthorized reading, or to eliminate those too curious. When he passed it to her, he didn't know. She opened it, handled it, then, when he kissed her goodbye, he condemned her, I finished. Holmes nodded once, and when Sophia arrived, she completed the operation, ensured there were no surviving documents, and chased the only other witness to ground. Volakis chose death over disclosure. Cowardice or atonement, we'll never know. Lestrade crossed his arms. "And the Baron?" Holmes turned slowly. "Gone, but not buried." He moved to the map pinned beside the bookshelf, where coloured threads connected Paris, London, and now Alexandria. "They're shifting operations to Egypt," he murmured. "Alexandria is ideal. Foreign ports, fractured jurisdictions, and a melting pot of allegiances. They'll build anew there." Lestrade grunted. "And you want to follow?" "No," Holmes said. "They expect pursuit, but not prevention." He tapped the thread connecting London to Marseille. "We don't chase them. We dismantle what remains here. We expose the rest of the network. The Baron was only one limb of a much older body." He turned to me. "Watson, bring the coded names. I believe our cipher lies not in language, but in pattern." We worked the remainder of the day in near silence, breaking only for tea and brief dictation. One by one, Holmes cross-referenced the names in the dossier against military logs, diplomatic rosters, and foreign posting archives. He eliminated aliases and matched known symbols with government appointments. By evening, the results were clear. 12 names, he said. 4 already dead, suspiciously. 3 under investigation for unrelated breaches. 5 remain embedded. Embedded where? I asked. He placed a hand on the file. 2 in Whitehall, 1 at the French consulate, another aboard a shipping ledger for Eastern trade. And the last, he paused, looking up, is a banker, a discreet conduit. He funds the whole operation. Volakis didn't just carry secrets, he carried bonds, codes, payments. Francesca may not have known that, but they feared she would discover it. And this banker? Sir Leonard Grey. The name meant little to me, but Lestrade muttered an oath. He's untouchable. On the board of the National Treasury. Knighted twice. Funds the Home Office. Holmes's mouth tightened. Then he's the root. Remove him and the whole scheme collapses. How? I asked. Surely he wouldn't have involved himself directly. Ah, Holmes said, but he left fingerprints through Volakis, payment ledgers, identical courier codes used in the last Treasury review. If we can expose the paper trail and link it to Sophia's statement, we bring him down, Lestrade finished. The silence that followed was charged. Holmes sat back. It won't be public. Men like Grey are never convicted in court. But he will be neutralized. Quietly and thoroughly. He reached for his pipe and lit it, drawing in a slow breath. The Countess's death began this journey, but it ends not with revenge, Watson, nor with violence. He exhaled a thin plume of smoke. It ends with accountability. We remained there as the fire crackled low, the shadows deepening around us. I thought again of Francesca, her graceful script, the urgency of her final message, the quiet courage in trusting Holmes when every other door had failed her. And I understood then what Holmes had meant the night before. That some signatures are not written in ink, but in action. In choosing to speak. In daring to defy those who traffic in silence. Outside, the fog was lifting once more, and the bells of Westminster tolled 8. Holmes turned to me, his voice quiet but certain. "It's done, Watson, for now." I nodded, and in that moment I knew. The game had closed, the players scattered, and the truth, buried beneath diplomacy and darkness, had finally been brought to light. A week passed in relative quiet. The fog that had clung to London during the height of the affair began to lift, both from the skies and, I felt, from our minds. There were no more intercepted telegrams, no shadowy visitors at the door, no hurried knocks from Lestrade in the rain. And yet the weight of the case lingered. It had not ended with the clatter of handcuffs or a triumphant declaration before the press. Instead, it faded like the echo of a pistol shot in the distance, lethal but contained. Holmes was not idle during those days. He wrote 2 anonymous letters to unnamed recipients via private diplomatic channels, one to Paris, the other to Alexandria. He composed a report for Mycroft so exacting in detail and language that it read more like a codebook than a summary. And perhaps most tellingly, he declined 3 separate invitations from Scotland Yard to consult on other matters. I knew he had not let go. It was on a damp Thursday morning, as we sat over modest cups of coffee and buttered toast, that the final thread arrived, not with a messenger or official post, but as a simple envelope slipped beneath our door without a sound. Holmes opened it without a word, and I saw his eyes sharpen. He handed it to me, and I read, "Mr. Holmes, you were right. He was the root, and now the tree has been cut, the others have scattered, the garden is being pruned, silently and without record. Your Countess sleeps in peace." See, no name, no return address, but Holmes tapped the bottom of the paper where a faint watermark, barely visible, showed 2 entwined leaves, the symbol of the Thistle Room. "A final courtesy," Holmes said softly, "or a final warning, but in either case, confirmation." "Grey?" I asked. "Removed," Holmes said, professionally. "Mycroft's reach is deep, though his methods remain noiseless. No trial, no scandal, but the funds have been frozen, the channels broken, and the agents without payroll or safe passage." He stood and moved to the window, watching the street below, the faint hum of morning life rising from the city like a slow breath. "I do not celebrate such endings," he said, "but I acknowledge their necessity." I closed the envelope carefully. "And Sophia?" "Still in custody, for now. I suspect she will be traded quietly to another agency in time. She knows too much for prison and too little for martyrdom." He turned then, and I saw something in his face I rarely did, not triumph nor relief, but a kind of earned weariness. He lowered himself into his armchair, stretched his legs toward the fire, and reached for his violin. A long pause passed before he played a note. "Francesca Montclair," he said at last, "was not trained in espionage. She did not know the protocols, the danger, or how many lives would be affected by what she read, but she had courage. She acted with it, and for that she deserves to be remembered." He lifted the bow and drew a single, mournful note from the strings, low, resonant, and full of restraint. I nodded. "And Volakis?" "A man torn between allegiance and love. He died trying to do the right thing, though far too late to undo the wrong." I looked to the fire. the final embers glowing. "And the Baron?" "Still at large," Holmes said, "but not untouchable. He will reappear. Such men always do, but next time he'll be slower, more cautious, and we will be waiting." There was little left to say after that. We sat in companionable silence, the weight of justice, imperfect, quiet, but real, settling over the room. As the city stirred beyond the window, Holmes lowered his violin and glanced sideways at me. "Tell me, Watson," he said with a trace of wry amusement, "have you ever considered how often truth disguises itself as sentiment? A kiss, a letter, a glance, all dismissed as trivial, and yet therein lie the motives of men and the undoing of empires." I smiled. "Then sentiment, it seems, is the most dangerous thing of all." Holmes chuckled softly and leaned back, eyes half closed. "No, my dear Watson," he said, "only when it's true." And with that, the case of the kiss that triggered murder was closed, not with violence or applause, but with the quiet assurance that truth, once uncovered, need not shout to endure.